Hello, I'm Dr. Scott Watier.
And I'm Tommy Welling, and you're listening to the Fasting for Life podcast.
This podcast is about using fasting as a tool to regain your health, achieve ultimate wellness, and live the life you truly deserve.
Each episode is a short conversation on a single topic with immediate actionable steps. We cover everything from fat loss and health and wellness to the science of lifestyle design.
We started Fasting for Life because of how fasting has transformed our lives, and we hope to share the tools that we have learned along the way. Hey everyone, welcome to the Fasting for Life podcast. My name is Dr. Scott Watier, and I'm here, as always, with my good friend and colleague, Tommy Welling. Good afternoon to you, sir.
Hey, Scott, how are you?
Doing fantastic, my friend. Excited. We are in the thick of the holiday season. If you want to hear a good conversation about the holidays and keeping momentum, head back to last episode, give it a listen. We're excited today to kind of go into a conversation that we saw from Dr. Lustig, who wrote the book Metabolical. And we're going to have a conversation around blood tests and really kind of a guide to understanding your blood panel and your cholesterol levels as we move from 2024 into 2025. As we know, the beginning of the year, there's some external momentum or encouragement and accountability where people are going to start the year fresh and hit all their health goals and all of that stuff. So we really want to give you some tools, kind of an overview of what the 8 leading metabolic health experts out there, Dr. Bickman, Dr. Lustig, Dr. Gottfried, et cetera, and kind of give you an overview of what that looks like and things that you can do in this upcoming year to make some strides in your fasting and health journey. So excited for today's conversation. If you are new to the podcast, welcome. Thanks for giving us a listen. And if you want to know more about Tommy, myself, our journey with fasting, how it's transformed our lives, head back to episode 1, give it a listen. We appreciate all of the 5-star reviews. Thank you so much for your feedback. You are continuing to help us reach more people, impact more lives, and pull folks out of the diet and weight loss unhealthy culture that we typically are surrounded by with the state of the union in terms of our overall health here in the States. And now we're starting to see it across the globe as well. So we're on a mission to pull you out and empower you to know that you have a choice, that there is another way, and that fasting can be a vehicle that can help so many of us get there. So if you're an OG, thank you again for listening in. If you're someone that felt like giving us a 1-star review because one of us was fighting COVID for 8 weeks and had to use some lozenges so we could continue to bring episodes to you each and every week, SCAR7, you can see yourself on the way out as well. No worries, you won't be missed, but we will continue to pour into each and every one of you that actually has a little bit of compassion and understanding that, it's not every day is going to be a 10. So I'm excited to start this year pouring into the people that want to be here. So we are very grateful for each and every one of our long-term listeners, because that continues to tell the podcast world that we're bringing value each and every week. So Tommy, 2024 is about to be in the rearview mirror. 2025, I can't believe I'm saying that. Right. The quarter century mark on the doorstep. And just lots of excitement in the health space, right? Coming up
revolution.
Here, right?
Yeah.
Something that I've been preaching in clinical practice for well over 20 years now, this idea that there's a personal responsibility to health and that, there are some concerning things that we see in the over-processed, over-curated food, obesogenic food environment that we live in with big advertising and marketing and Taco Bell fourth meal and all of this.
Oh, they're bringing back the decades menu.
Oh, yeah.
They're going in the way back machine too. Like, hey, don't forget about this guy. Remember when you were younger? Remember back in the 90s, maybe in the early 2000s? We're bringing back some of the old classics too. Let's see if those don't bring about some dopamine and some maybe old habits, right? It's tough out there.
It is, man, and there's a lot of conflicting information. So there's a lot of excitement coming up at the beginning of the year with some big changes. And I'm excited about it because there's so much alignment with what we believe. And then we did the JRE kind of overview with the Meanses and their conversation. So there's just this awareness now that, there's no veil there anymore. The walls seem to be coming down, and the fact that our healthcare system is not a healthcare system; it's a sick care system.
Right.
And when we started this podcast years ago, our goal was to empower people to take back control of their health. Right. And one of the biggest hurdles that we see is not necessarily the societal stuff, the friends and family, the cultural stuff, the status quo, the norms, so to speak, in the obesogenic food world that we live in, the calorie over the quality, so to speak. But it's this idea that we live in a system and operate in a system that, we don't want to be on medication. We don't want to have to go to the doctor and have that awkward conversation. So this whole personal advocacy for your own healthcare, you hit a wall when you operate in a system that doesn't align with your health goals. So you go to the doctor, you get some blood work, and then the ultimate conversation comes, well, yeah, you need to lose a little bit of weight. Or, oh, yeah, your labs are a little elevated. Or, oh, hey, your fasting blood sugar is high. Your liver enzymes are elevated. That LDL cholesterol, we got to put you on a statin. Your blood pressure is ticking up. And the reality is like, no one wants that. So there's this fear that grips us about having to go and do that and push back. And if you live in a country like Canada and you've been waiting to get a doctor appointment, and then you go in and then you're like, well, I want to do this. And the doc's like, well, no, I need you to do this. And the reality is you have the choice, right, to say yes or no to the treatment that's recommended. And if there's a theme throughout all of the journeys and all of the testimonials and thousands and tens of thousands of stories that we've heard from folks over the millions of downloads over the past almost 5 years now, is that the thing that they love the most is that when they know that they can stand up for themselves and say, you know what? No, this is the plan. This is the strategy. I'm going to go act this out and I'm going to prove you wrong. And that's kind of the idea is we want to empower you with this conversation today to know and understand your metrics so you don't have to rely on a broken system or a doctor that may not align with what you want for your health instead of the status quo, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it certainly does. And the cool thing there is that it's a little bit of information and understanding goes a long way in the confidence piece of asking the right questions, of saying, well, this is what I want to do. This is why it's working right now. Like let's say you got started with intermittent fasting, for example, and then you're starting to see the scale move finally where it hasn't been. And then it's kind of like, okay, I think I've kind of stumbled upon something for myself that is going to be helpful. And you kind of have that intuitive notion, when that starts to happen. But at the same time, that doesn't necessarily mean I have the gumption or the confidence or the wherewithal to walk into my doctor's office and go, no, sir, I'm not going to be, going to start that statin because I'm on the right track. I want to see where this goes. I want to see if I can get better results than what we're talking about on my blood work by throwing, a medication at it. And so the understanding of a few things that matter within the blood work and within those conversations with your doctor go a long way to buying a little bit of time and a little bit of, no, this is why I want to do this, a little bit more confidence to have that conversation, then to start walking it out. And then to see where that leads, and it's likely to lead somewhere more beneficial as that intuition is kind of telling you.
And the idea here is that it's all a personal journey too, but there are some overarching consistencies when we look at labs and we look at the normal range. Normal does not mean optimal, right? For instance, we'll get into all of the different specifics. And if you want, you can head to the show notes, click the link. There'll be a download where you can actually get an infographic of the actual recommended optimal ranges. Now, this is not Dr. Scott and Tommy's, Bill and Ted's excellent adventure, where we just kind of like threw this together. It's like, oh, here, yeah. No, this is from some of the top leading metabolic experts and what they recommend. And there's a couple of points where I will disagree with them. One is in terms of total cholesterol. And we'll get into it and kind of walk through it one by one. But if you want the visual of the labs that you can and should be requesting for overall health, then this is really what we want to do, is to empower you with the tools and then also the understanding of why behind it, right? So, and if you are the baby boomer generation, and I can speak from personal experience of having a practice that was about 30%, 40% at sometimes of that generation. My dad, who has reversed his diabetes of 30 years and come off 15 medications, this typical metabolic syndrome, heart disease, blood pressure, cholesterol, blood sugar, you name it. There's a lot of repeaters in there too on multiple versions of multiple things to manage one issue.
Yep. That's not quite enough. Let's throw another one at it that works. Complementary to it. Yep.
3 forms of insulin, 3 whatever. And he didn't
short acting, medium, long acting, all that kind of stuff.
And he didn't eat fast food and drink beer every day either. Like he just ate like home cooked meals, and you're going, well, what the hell? Yeah. So, but he's lost all the weight, come off all the medications, and now has better numbers now than ever when he was on before, when he was on all those meds. Never mind falling asleep at the dinner table in an insulin coma.
Amazing.
So the reality is that when we look at normal,
quote unquote normal, right?
Quote unquote normal, it's not optimal. And one thing I learned recently was that, when you go to a lab locally and you have your blood drawn, those numbers actually change and vary based on the demographics around you and the amount of tests that have been run. So it's a statistical analysis of the area you're in. And I'm like, okay, well, why is it normal here but not there, right? So we want to talk overarching, encouraging, understanding that if you want to get different results from the status quo, like the statistics right now don't lie. 75% of the population is overweight or obese. We're the most unhealthy country on the planet, yet we spend trillions of dollars more than anyone else. We have more lifestyle sickness and disease. We have less quality of life as we age. And there's all these myths and misconceptions. If we stand on optimal physiology rather than the air quotes norm, then you're going to be in a much better place to make decisions when it comes to your health. You're like, all right, this is a fasting podcast. Well, how does this apply? Well, the cool thing is the 260 episodes we've done before this, 75% of them, I would say, have some form of research reference point that has shown dramatic improvement, even without changing your dietary norms, meaning your food choices and getting away from the standard American diet, even without doing that.
Yeah. And activity level or exercise too, like without changing that either, right?
You see improvements in these markers. So yeah, we're going to nerd out a little bit. We're going to give you the resources. But the reality is fasting is the tool that we believe that moves the needle. And it's exactly why we wanted to have this conversation leading at the end of 2024 into 2025, so we can empower and encourage to hit the ground running with a plan that's going to transform, not just operate within the status quo.
Yeah, and getting a better understanding of what's going on in a more detailed way within the blood work, what to ask your doctor about, what to request as far as your labs. Fasting is oftentimes the accelerant to the progress, to the making strides, to the getting the threat of the looming statin or whatever it might be kind of off your back, getting the monkey off your back, if you will, and then working your way towards more optimal, towards better body composition, towards more optimal physiology, and more on the then you get to start transitioning over to the longevity, quality of life, and like overall like tapping into your energy stores even more effectively and more efficiently than you've seen in the past, rather than just worrying about, one or two or maybe multiple blood markers that are kind of out of whack. Like we can completely level up what those conversations look like whenever you're going to your, to get your lab work done.
And if we're going to look at normal ranges, right? So let's just think about this for a second. If we are staying and operating inside of the system we currently have with the normal ranges and the normal blood tests that we get. So we get a cholesterol panel, we get a CMP, we get a glucose. In other words, doctor doesn't tell you anything or say anything. It's like no news is good news, right? So maybe you can get in Google or phone a friend, right? And you look at the standard ranges, but it's really hard to know like what an elevated or depressed number truly means, right? So that's not really the way we want to look at health, but we want to empower you to understand that, the standard ranges for the test are not exactly where we want to be. And here's why. So if we were within the normal ranges over time, and then slowly we start to tick out of those accepted normal ranges now, right? Well, then if that was a plan that was really working, wouldn't we be in a much different place in terms of our overall health as a country. It doesn't seem like we may be aiming in the right direction, but we may not have the precision needed. And that's the difference between optimal versus standard. So it's now much more common that people know about LDL, thanks to Huberman and Atia and all the podcasts that talk about these types of things. It's much more known that, LDL on its own doesn't really tell us much unless it's exceedingly rare high levels, right? Doesn't really tell us much. There's a much more in-depth look at cholesterol, a full cholesterol panel, but then it becomes complex and you're like, man, what the hell does that mean? Well, your doctor doesn't really, if they're not running the test, then guess my interpretation of that situation is that they don't see it as being necessary, or they don't know how to interpret it, or it's not going to change what they're going to do for you.
Yeah.
Right. So there's nuance and disagreement, but one thing is clear that like the optimal ranges versus the standard ranges, the optimal is much more strict. And that's because we want to look at the root cause. And we talk a ton on this podcast about insulin resistance and that insulin number. And this is the biggest thing that I notice when it comes to, hey, ask your doctor for a fasting insulin number. The reason those aren't ordered routinely is because, and they're only ordered typically in type 2 diabetics when you get put on insulin eventually, as you go down the metabolic pathway where the medications don't work and the lifestyle intervention doesn't change and you end up needing insulin. The only time insulin is ordered is to monitor where you are, but it's never actually told like what to do about it. That's why they don't order the test. It's not going to change the actual clinical protocol. And that's a problem. So none of these markers exist in isolation, right? We need to look at them in a more nuanced way. And that's what we hope to do today. And I'll just say this disclaimer now. This is not a constitution. This is not medical advice. Okay. We are not playing I did not stay at a Holiday Inn Express last night. Okay. So this is for educational purpose. Talk to your doctor. Do some research, right? Figure it out. Look into it. Start to think differently and question. You're right. I don't really want to do what everybody else is doing because I don't want the results that everybody else has.
Sure. Yeah, like fasting insulin is a great example. I had never had a fasting insulin done.
Yeah.
And then, but starting to understand like what that meant, what were the reference ranges, seeing that there reference ranges on most blood panels if you are able to get it done, if your doctor would actually order it, or maybe you went to a third party provider and got it.
You can do it now, right? You can order test kits at home. You can go to any labs test now and pay for it.
Yeah, and it's a great idea if you're suspecting insulin resistance. A great idea to do it. And the last time I got it done now, which was about 6 months ago, it came back as 1.95. And I wish I knew what it was 5 years ago, 50 pounds ago, because I did get to take a look at one of my good friends' blood work where he got a fasting insulin, but his came back quote unquote within the normal range, but the normal range on there was up to a 25 and he was right below that at like a 23.8, somewhere right around 20.
I was a 22.
I was like, whoa. And the only reason why his doctor ordered it is because after dinner, oftentimes, and it was oftentimes after a restaurant dinner, he would just crash. Like he would feel like he was almost falling asleep, on the way home from dinner. And it was like this uncontrollable lethargy that would hit him. And like, this is a major, major red flag of insulin resistance, like almost obviously, but I'm not trying to be, tongue in cheek about it or make it sound like it's that obvious, because it's not necessarily that obvious when you're going through it. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And here's the reality is like, I was in a very similar situation, but my liver enzymes are slightly elevated. My blood pressure was slightly elevated. My waist circumference was, I was a power lifter back in the day. It was bigger than it should have been. I had visceral adiposity, I had chronic stress, poor sleep, all these lifestyle type things. I wasn't out there eating fast food and drinking all day. Right. And it's like, what the hell? I was doing the eat less, move more. I hired a nutritionist here in Houston, paid $10K for functional medicine tests. And I'm like, $10,000 to try to figure out why am I not getting results. I could stick to a caloric deficit and eat less, move more for a while, but eventually it just stopped working. And people are like, oh, you must not have been tracking right. Oh, you weren't in a deficit. Oh, you're blah, blah, blah. I'll insert all of these things that I was doing wrong. Right. Yep. And I'm like, no, 20 years. Like stop it.
Mm-hmm.
So I could do it for other people in practice, and in clinic, they were losing weight and getting well, and their labs are improving. What the hell? So insert fasting insulin. My A1C was still normal. We found now that insulin resistance starts in the skeletal muscle years before it shows up in your liver, in glycogen abnormalities, and then also in your labs. So
your body has a huge range of what it can do before some other problem starts to become obvious, right? It's almost like before something starts to spill over into the next biochemical pathway. And that's part of where the insulin resistance is able to build, where fasting insulin might be ticking up in the background. No one's ordering that despite your growing number of symptoms. And then at the same time, that is keeping your A1C, which is the more obvious or closely looked at marker, more oftentimes looked at marker, that's keeping that relatively in range, where that might be ticking up, but it's not through the roof in red alert territory, but your fasting insulin might be, or something else. Like your body has ways that one issue might be hidden because of the range of flexibility and variability within another biochemical pathway.
So here are the tests. We're going to go into them. First of all, I want to tell you where these numbers are coming from and the aggregate through Levels Health. They put this article together with the advisors who I've read and heard of, every single one of them. And we're talking about like the who's who of metabolic health. So we got Ben Bickman, PhD, Associate Professor Brigham and Young, leading insulin researcher. Dom D'Agostino, Associate Professor, University of South Florida, leading researcher in neuro implications of keto. Dr. Sarah Godfrey, Director of Precision Medicine at the Marcus Institute of Integrative Health. Huge, multiple, pioneering physician scientist, author of books. All of these people have multiple books that they've written. Research focused on metabolic phenotypes and prediabetes. Dr. Mark Hyman, you know him. Let food be thy medicine. That's his quote. May have missed a couple of words in there, but that's the takeaway. Dr. Rob Lustig, right? He's really big on the dangers of sugar and processed food. He's got clinical focus on childhood obesity and diabetes. Dr. Molly Maloof, functional medicine physician, Stanford lecturer on health span and longevity. Dr. Casey Means, who was on the Joe Rogan podcast with her brother Callie Means recently. So chief medical officer and co-founder of Levels. And then we've got Dr. David Perlmutter, who Grain Brain is his big, most well-known book. But it's, University of Miami School of Medicine, leading expert in neurodegeneration and metabolic health. So this isn't, like I said, Bill and Ted's, State of Holiday and Express last night. This is the leading people in this field saying, hey, these markers are different. And inside of our coaching program, we have an actual lab. We give our coaching clients a lab outline with some research behind it. And it's the exact same things that are listed here. And the tests are, don't worry, it's in the show notes, high sensitivity, HSCRP, high sensitivity C-reactive protein, which is an inflammation marker, A1C, which we know, fasting glucose, right? You've had that test done. Fasting insulin, the one Tommy and I were talking about, myself and with his friend, LDL-C, so not just LDL, but the fluffy little bad boys, triglycerides, HDL, which we know as the good cholesterol, total cholesterol to HDL ratio, triglyceride to HDL ratio. I'll put more stock in that one. This is a cool one because I've done this stuff with CGMs and Keto Mojos and blood sugar monitors, post-meal glucose. And then when you have a couple of those data points, you can then calculate your HOMA-IR, which is the gold standard for insulin resistance. It's homeostatic model assessment for insulin resistance. We've done multiple podcast episodes on that as well. So overall, we're going to be talking about inflammation with CRP, right? We're going to be talking about A1C, which is the glycation where the glucose lives on your blood cell, right? And this is going to be kind of over a 90-day period on how healthy or unhealthy your response to carbohydrates and sugar is, right?
Yep.
There are limitations to it. We'll talk about normal and optimal. Then we're going to talk about fasting glucose. So this is like in the morning when you've been fasted, what does your blood sugar look like? Okay. This is that, one that is pretty standard. Then we've got fasting insulin. That's the one where we talked about the range from, 5, 4, all the way up to 25, depending on the lab you have it ran. Mm-hmm. The normal range is less than 25, but ours is less than 6. So there's a big variety
Again,
there.
tightening up, right? The difference between quote unquote normal versus, but what's actually healthy and optimal? Not let's just compare it to our local zip code, the other people around us who are not probably health-wise exactly where we want to be.
Yep. Then we've got LDL-C. You guys are familiar with LDL, right? The bad cholesterol. Then we've got by itself, not an indicator for statin medication. Again, not medical advice, but truth. Then we've got triglycerides, right? Everybody's familiar with that. We'll talk about normal versus standard. That's going to be, the key marker for metabolic syndrome and insulin resistance. And then HDL, which is the good cholesterol. We're talking about the ratio here in just a minute. And then total cholesterol. So the total amount of cholesterol, there's this misconception that if you eat cholesterol, it's going to end up in your bloodstream. Well, it's less than 3 to 5% of the cholesterol you eat actually ends up in your blood as cholesterol. 95 to 98% or 97% is created from your liver. And then we've got the post-meal glucose. So what should your blood sugar be after you eat, which is incredibly eye-opening. And then HOMA-IR, like I mentioned, which is the this is how we look at your body's insulin and how it's working on dealing with the sugar in terms of insulin resistance versus insulin sensitivity. Now, again, Tommy, before I want to start just going one by one and hitting the normal versus standard. Mm-hmm. When we look at this and we look at the overall kind of big picture, fasting has been shown to improve all of these metrics.
Yep.
In a lot of the studies we've looked at, better than with caloric restriction. And we'll see in some cases where eucaloric diets are used and diets match, right? Mm-hmm. We will see changes in labs in the fasting group versus the caloric restriction or the standard control group.
Yep.
Absolutely. With or without weight loss.
What about the fact that the fasting groups have oftentimes outperformed the medication groups?
That's true.
We put them up against the pharmaceutical gold standard and just changed meal timing and had much more substantially better results in the fasting group versus the pharmaceutical intervention group. That's the one that's really, really amazing on a lot of these metrics.
It's just so interesting. So when we look at these, and you can grab the marker, the infograph, the HSCRP. So this is the one that's really important about looking at inflammation, right? Mm-hmm. And it's a hidden inflammation. It is directly related to diabetes and insulin resistance. It also is related to Alzheimer's disease, leaky gut infection, cancer, sleep disorders, sleep apnea, metabolic syndrome. And it can also bind to and block leptin receptors, right? Which is your body's satiety signal telling you that you're full. So if you're just one of those people that can just eat, right? And you never get full, well, that's probably due to leptin and HSCRP to some degree.
So literally inflammation can throw off all of your hunger cues and cravings, right? Just that by itself.
100%.
I mean, that's huge.
So this one is definitely important. And for, in terms of, what's what I'm looking for? In terms of standard ranges, what typically you'll see is somewhere around that 2.0 range. Mm-hmm. Lower risk of heart disease below, higher risk of heart disease after. But we would really like to see the HSCRP below 1 being ideal, and even less in healthy patients who are not like elite athletes. We want to see that below 0.5.
Yeah, and one of the issues with HSCRP is because it's tied to cardiometabolic health, the standard medical assumption or use for this test was actually based on the most common use was around heart disease risk. And so for patients who had a family history of it and who had potential red flag markers in their blood work, they were getting this test. But not everybody was getting it. It wasn't part of a standard, physical profile that you might get in your blood work every year. So sometimes this is still oftentimes not seen in a lot of people's standard yearly physical, if you want to call it that, blood work. So that's tricky. So, but you should be able to ask for this, to request it, and generally it's available, but it's much more telling than just talking about risk of heart attack. That's obviously an important thing, but there's much more that you can learn from your HSCRP levels. And
you can add this on, right? This is not a crazy test. This is just something you can add on to your routine blood work or ask your doc for. Mm-hmm. When we look at A1C, so this is one that's pretty normal in terms of being routinely tested for.
Right.
But there are some limitations. So the normal ranges for A1C are typically less than 5.7 is normal, 5.7 to 6.4 is pre-diabetic, and if 6.4 or above is diabetic, right?
Mm-hmm.
So some issues with A1C, however, is when we look at this, it's important because how do I say this? It's going to look at your glycation, meaning how many, the percentage of your blood cells that have damage to them by the attachment of glucose molecules over a 90-day period. So the problem is that A1C has a sensitivity of only about 60%. So that means about 40% of patients with impaired fasting glucose or glucose tolerance tests will go underdiagnosed, delaying their opportunity of having to make a decision about their health.
Yeah.
So that's pretty frightening. Nor does it explain that 30% of variation in fasting plasma glucose. So this doesn't take into the individual's glycemic variability because you will see in different populations, African, Mediterranean, Southeast Asian, Caucasian, even in terms of like perimenopause and menopausal women, it doesn't take into account the hypoglycemia that's seen at night. So it's not a reflection of what's happening day to day. And there's a lot of like sensitivity issues in terms of this being the gold standard.
Yeah, there really is, because it's measuring an average. So you can literally look them up in tables. Like, for example, I think around a 4.9 is about an average glucose level of 94. Okay. Roughly. So it's literally you can just calculate your average glucose. But however, that's good to know, but it doesn't tell you about the peaks and the valleys, like you just implied, those hypoglycemic valleys, or arguably maybe in some cases even more important, potentially the hyperglycemic peaks that kind of come about, especially post meal or right before bedtime. So going in later on in the day, because those, even if your average was, let's say, a 94 or so, you'd have a 4.9, you'd come up in the normal range. But if you're having these large spikes after a lot of meals, that's problematic, because then your insulin response is based on those spikes. That means your fasting insulin on average is coming up. It's ticking up because of your blood sugar levels. But if you don't have your fasting insulin, you won't know it. And your HbA1c is kind of, again, masking that effect that's actually going on underneath the surface too. Yep.
And so overall agreement here is that less than 5.5 is what we want. But there are some experts out there that want to see it less than 5.2 and even less than 5. So this can be seen in going low carb, calorie restriction. We're not talking about the healthy, lean 8 to 12 or 12 to 15% male or man or woman here. We're talking about the 75% of the population, right, that has some form of this. They're in this metabolic pathway dysfunction group heading towards lifestyle disease and conditions. So yeah, less than 5 is even better, but less than 5.5 is definitely the place that you want to go. Now, understand the limitations. These don't live in a vacuum. They all kind of take into account the overall health of an individual. So
of course,
the next one, which we talk a lot about, is blood sugar, right? And there's all this blood sugar conversation out there right now, blood sugar spikes, and your blood sugar shouldn't be spiking. Well, the reality is it should be. But consistently doing it improperly or being elevated over time is what leads to these issues and insulin resistance over time. So blood sugar spikes and blood sugar levels is really going to be an issue with your carbohydrate metabolism. So either insulin resistance or a type 2 diabetic situation or a type 1 situation where there's damage to the ability of the actual pancreas to make the cells. So this is a functional marker where it's going to tell you how your body is being able to handle carbohydrates. And most folks know the standard range is under 100. 1 to 125 is pre-diabetic. I was an undiagnosed pre-diabetic. My fasting blood sugar was under 100. My A1C was within normal range. Yep. But my fasting insulin was 22. So, and then if you go above 126, that's diagnosis for diabetes. So ideally, taking all into this account, we want to be looking at really being below 90, right? So I've seen some as low as 65 if you are a ketosis type patient, if you're doing keto type diets. So that's going to shout out your CGM monitor. But really, the lower the better in this situation. So 86 or lower is something that's been documented from other people in the insulin space, but definitely less than 90. And we want to stay away from that 90 to 100 range.
Yeah, I mean, it's like it's okay. I love the fact that a lot of the metabolic revolution and metabolic understanding and insights that have come about just over the last decade have started to help people understand that when we're not on blood sugar lowering medications, it's okay to be below 90. It's okay to see below 80. If I use my Keto Mojo, if I take my blood and I'm on, let's say it's a 72-hour fast, I might see 64 and I might feel amazing, and I usually do. And like that's almost like unheard of when you start looking at these reference ranges and things like that. I mean, if I walk into the doctor's office for blood work, I'm not going to go in on a longer fast like that because that would just be silly. But if I did and I came up like that and blood sugar was in that range, I mean, it would shout out, it would spark, red flags on the blood work there. But so understanding the quote unquote normal ranges versus physiological optimal ranges, again, are sometimes different.
So going from blood sugar to insulin, the fasting insulin test is, I think, if I were going to put all of these on a hierarchy of importance, I think this would be a great place to start. Because then from here, you can make decisions on, do I need to do low carb? What does my fasting need to be like? Right? What is my long-term strategy here? Because it's going to give you, between the blood sugar and the insulin, an idea of what your insulin sensitivity is like, what your metabolic function is like, and how your body actually handles carbohydrates. Because when people want to lose weight, they're like, I'm never going to eat bread again. Right? I'll give up ice cream forever. Right? That's just the common thing these days with the diet mentality, is to go to these fad type diets. We want to have more of a less dogmatic, more of a long-term strategy, like, well, who you are, what are your lifestyle choices, what do you like to do, and what's sustainable for you, right? So the insulin one is really cool because it's what takes the glucose and it's the transporter and the GLUT4 receptors to shuttle it into your cells, right? And it's your fat storage, fat burning hormone. So it's going to store it in your skeletal muscle. It's going to store it in a small amount in your blood. It's going to, insulin's not doing that, but you have a storage place for energy in your blood. You have about a 24-hour storage capacity in your liver. And then you've got unlimited in fat. So insert problem, right? So the takeaway here is the standard range is less than 25. But really, we want to see between 2 and 6.
Yeah.
And you can look at the fasting blood sugar, calculate your HOMA-IR, which we'll get to. But this is one that we want to see. This is really important because it's the before the blood sugar, right? So fasting insulin rises long before fasting glucose does, which is an early warning sign. We don't want to play in the diabetes, pre-diabetes, undiagnosed diabetes, 80 million American sandbox.
Yeah.
We want to see what's happening upstream. So fasting insulin or insulin resistance is the place to start. And that's why I really hit this one as like, man, if I had to rate these 1 to 10, I'd put this one at the top of the list.
Yeah, it would give you a huge amount of information to then make other decisions based on, and to dive in and dig a little bit deeper. But the trouble is that when you come up and your HbA1c is, let's say it's at a 6.0, if it's at a 5.7, it's at a 6.0, you might be being told something like, things are happening, you're not on the right track, we need to keep an eye on it, things like that, like where it's like the focus starts to be on that, but really it's more of a fear than a focus, because then there's typically not action steps based on that, except for maybe probably losing a few pounds would help, something like that. But when you're in a provider's office and that's the recommendation, it's not really actionable at that point. And then also, so where does it kind of go from there? But if the action step really was, hey, this number is out of whack, and it's an indication that there are more things that are probably out of whack right now that we don't see. So let's dive in a little bit deeper. That would be the correct way to handle that situation. And then because if you see an issue on a microscope, you're probably going to zoom in even further. You're going to get a more powerful microscope to take a closer look, not just say, oh, there's a problem here, let's check back on it in 6 months or in a year. That's opposite, a helpful path, right?
100%. So one of the most important tests you can have done in terms of knowing and taking back control, right, of your health and your health journey, push for it to get ordered. Have the conversation, right? Mm-hmm. Get the guide. Be like, no, this is why I want to do it, because I think it's going to be very impactful for a lot of people. So let's talk about cholesterol, Tommy. We're gonna kind of do the cholesterol, triglyceride conversation all as one. So we've got LDL, right? This is often implicated in plaque buildup leading to atherosclerosis, right? Air quotes, bad cholesterol. It's actually not the problem. The problem is the oxidation of that cholesterol.
Go see the previous part of the discussion about inflammation, where the oxidation kind of comes in, right?
Yes. So LDL is a factor in the context when it has elevated triglycerides, A1C, and HSCRP, to your point, Tommy, of the inflammation, right? Yeah. So it becomes bad when you have all these other things. If you're just looking at LDL as the diagnostic to say, hey, no. Because in fact, more than 50% of people who show up in the emergency room with heart attacks have normal cholesterol.
Wow.
But they have small cholesterol particles, which are caused by insulin resistance.
Mm.
Now, an NMR lipid testing is really the gold standard, according to Dr. Hyman, a CAC score, coronary artery scans. But those are really cost prohibitive, and they're not necessarily needed, because what we can do is, with the rest of these metrics, is extrapolate kind of where you stand. So the risk factor for heart disease isn't the LDL-C, it's the insulin resistance of metabolic syndrome, of which triglycerides is a much better marker.
Mm-hmm.
So where does cholesterol come from? Where does the majority? It doesn't come from your food. It comes from the refined carbohydrates and sugars in your diet and or alcohol.
Mm.
So let's just be real. Now we can look at APOB and NMR, all of those more advanced tests, but let's just talk about, where we want to see these numbers. So standard, less than 70. For high-risk patients, less than 100, less than 130 otherwise for most normal folks. Let's say normal, right? That's kind of a play on words there, because these are the standard normal ranges.
Right.
But ideally, what we'd like to see is not necessarily an LDL, like cold, hard facts, like has to be less than 100, right? But if you were to say optimal, then we're going to shoot for less than 100. Mm-hmm. And less than 70 is even more recommended to be more optimal from others. But here's the thing. As a standalone, it doesn't really mean much, but the lower is overall better. So let's talk about the triglyceride component, right? We want to be shooting for triglycerides overall less than 150. Let's just keep it easy.
Okay.
Optimal, probably more closer to that 100 range. Okay, so that's a part of the equation. Let's talk about HDL. HDL is the air quotes good cholesterol, right? There's been studies showing that HDL above 60 is reduced cardiovascular risk, like damn near zero. Decreased in certain cancers, decrease in chronic lifestyle disease, the higher your HDL goes. So HDL goes down because of insulin resistance, and low HDL is associated with heart disease risk. So we should be above 60 as your baseline. But here's the reality. The higher, the better.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Tommy.
Fasting also can put a short-term change on some of these numbers as well. So I don't want to forget to mention that. Just the fact that if you've been mobilizing some fat stores lately, tapping into the long-term fat freezer, right? Yeah, losing some weight.
Yeah, if you're losing weight.
Then regardless of if you made any changes to your dietary patterns, but if you mobilize some fat recently, then that can tick up things like triglycerides, like HDL, but also like LDL and total cholesterol as well. So that's an important thing to understand too, because like if you're walking into a provider's office and it's like, oh, that's good. You're down 15 pounds from the last time I saw you. But at the same time, some of the blood work is ticked up in a way that we weren't really expecting. Well, a lot of times that's a temporary thing for the fat loss process. Although it may be a good time to also take a look at how you're eating, how those carbohydrates are affecting you, because like you said, a lot of these numbers are tied into what the liver biochemistry is doing. And with certain types of carbohydrates especially, and when they're prolonged and they're later in the day and blood sugar is staying elevated, leading to certain biochemical changes, these are also forcing some of those fat molecules to actually tick up as well in kind of a counterintuitive way.
Yep, absolutely. So fasting will, in the long term, will make triglycerides go down, HDL go up, and LDL and total cholesterol go down. Now, not in all cases, but when we look at this, you have to assess the triglycerides and the HDL component when it comes to total cholesterol and LDL. You can't use it as a sole metric, right? So we're looking at total cholesterol. The consensus is less than 180. Now, this is where I'm going to push back a little bit and say that I'd be much more concerned with someone that has a total cholesterol of 300 and LDL of 140, but triglycerides of 60 and HDL of 80. So, meaning, let me say that one more time. So I was one of these people. Triglycerides were elevated, HDL was low. Total cholesterol was elevated. That's concerning. Someone that comes in that has total cholesterol of 300, but an LDL of 140 and triglycerides of 60 and HDL of 80, I'm much less concerned about.
Okay. Yeah.
Grab the infograph. It's going to be helpful because I know we're talking a lot of numbers, but I want to talk about the ratios, and ratios suck. Let's just be honest. Who likes fractions? Who likes math? So LDL, bad predictor of heart disease. When we're looking at total cholesterol to HDL ratio and triglyceride to HDL ratio, I would put above if I had to rank these two. Because this is a way to check for insulin resistance other than the insulin response test, right? So this is a paper that was published in the Journal of Circulation, and it's a much better test to predict your risk of heart attack. And this is the triglyceride to HDL ratio. So when we're looking at these two, just for numbers' sake, just so we get them out here and we say them, total cholesterol to HDL is going to be 3.5 to 1 or less than 2 is optimal. And then triglyceride to HDL, which is the one that I would put in the basket of the fasting insulin test if we're going to rate the most important ones.
Okay.
you want to see that 2.5 to 1 for Caucasians and 1.5 to 1 for African Americans. But the reality is with both of these, lower is better. Let's not talk about standard, but let's just get these damn things low.
Low, yeah.
So if you have a standard panel, you can do these easy calculations and see where you're at. So let's transition to the last two, Tommy. Blood sugar, post-meal glucose, and HOMA-IR.
Okay. So when we're talking about post-meal glucose, it's important to know that your meal timing matters. As we get later on in the day, we're going to have a different physiological response than we are earlier in the day. And so that's going to carry on with us as we get into our sleep cycle. The body is not very good at regulating blood sugar and resting and recovering properly and efficiently when blood sugar is very much elevated when you're going into those twilight hours. So that can be a problem. So depending on what your habits are, how often are you kind of fasting, either fasting through dinner or making a clean break with your fasting, getting later on in the day, is really going to affect what your overnight blood sugar levels are, and then what your early morning blood sugars are going to be too, which is going to be indicative of your metabolic health. It's also going to lead to changes or stagnation on the scale, as well as changes to your biochemistry that are going to show up in the other blood markers that we're talking about here too. And, for some folks, they might be helpful to take a blood measurement, like using a Keto Mojo or some other device like that, or consider a continuous glucose monitor so you can see what those numbers are as you kind of progress through the day. Not only that, but you'll also see what different food decisions do for your blood sugar as well, and how your fasting is affecting that as well.
So the crazy part here with this post-meal blood sugar, right, is we want to look at the area under the curve. So if you had a kid who drew a picture and colored all the area under the rainbow versus someone who just drew the outline of a rainbow, right? So that colored in area under this curve of where your blood sugar rises and then comes back down, we want to see that return to normal within the 2 to 3 hour range, right? So it's called postprandial blood sugar. Simply stated in this case, what is your blood sugar level post meal, right? The problem is, if you look at, you go to the CDC and you look at postprandial blood sugar levels, it's crazy because we're going to look at all of these different subcategories and subgroups. So it's going to be like, oh, if you're a pre-diabetic, it should be this. If you're a diabetic, it should be this. And we're going to be looking at numbers of 180 to 200. And I'm like, but wait a minute. If the whole idea is to get blood sugar to come down, then how is that the normal standard range that we want to be shooting for?
Right. No, it's absolutely not.
It's not.
Way too high. No.
Right? So
it's not normal. It's not normal.
It's not. It's absolutely not normal. So what we don't want to manage the blood sugar response. What we want to shoot for optimal blood sugar, right? So when we look at optimal blood sugar, we want to see, and this is something I'm still working on, we want to see those numbers really be 110 to 115. Another conversation we can have here is you really want to see maybe a 30 to 40 point swing. If you're seeing anything bigger than that, 30 on the low range, 40 on that, then something you ate, or the volume you ate, or the sugar you ate, or the time you ate, or the stress level you had, or the lack of sleep, something is telling your body hey, you're not processing that energy properly, which is going to kind of point you in the direction of fat storage and metabolic dysfunction versus energy burning, fat burning, right? So yes, 110 to 115 at max. And we want to kind of shrink those peaks and valleys over time. And to your point, Tommy, this is where fasting is absolutely powerful because it will do this pretty quickly. People will start fasting, they fall off the wagon, they come back man, my blood sugar won't come down. I'm like, keep fasting. Well, for how long? Until your number comes down.
Yeah. Give it some time.
Your body's smart.
But your body's also resilient to the change. And also you have layers of insulin resistance that have been building over time where the insulin still the sensing of the blood sugar changes is still out of balance. It's still not proper. It's still not optimal physiologically. And so to add to your list of things that you might be doing in a way that is leading to higher levels of blood sugar, it might be what you're doing after you eat as well. For a long time, I was counting the calories, I was counting the macros, and I was fitting it into the box. But at the same time, what I was eating, my food choices, even though they met the number requirements, afterwards, it would be a sedentary time for me afterwards. Yep. And that was partially because I felt lethargic after I ate because of levels of insulin resistance. But also that was just a pattern for me too. If I knew how important it would have been to just go for a 15 or 20 or 30-minute walk afterwards to help actually squash that area under the curve that you were mentioning for my postprandial blood sugar, I would have done it. I would have just pulled myself up by my bootstraps at that point if I understood how important it was. And then that would have actually helped gain some momentum on the problem. But I didn't understand that those small choices actually led to changes in my metabolic health over time. So that's a really important to understand.
So when we look at this last one, blood sugar related HOMA-IR, the gold standard for insulin resistance, it's a calculation that takes into account your fasting blood sugar and your fasting insulin. So you can't even calculate it if you don't have your fasting insulin. But the reality here is just anything less than 1. And this is really showing an insulin sensitive state, that you have metabolic flexibility. And when the big picture here, I wouldn't put this high on the list of things you need to calculate, right? But if you do get a fasting insulin, it is interesting to know kind of where you are. And as we wrap up today, Tommy, and we go through all these different numbers, and people's heads are probably spinning, and go grab the resource. It's there for you. These are the labs I'd recommend you get for 2025. We'll put a link as well to Dr. Lustig's conversation about this, so you guys can have that link as well and hear it from one of the horse's mouths. But the reality is that, again, these markers don't exist in isolation. We need to become metabolically healthier. 2018, University of North Carolina said that 88% of the country was metabolically unhealthy, meaning they had one or more symptoms of metabolic syndrome that leads to cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, poor quality of life, and ultimately lifestyle, some form of early mortality due to a lifestyle-induced condition. That means we have control over it. And, when we're talking about making changes to this, that personal responsibility is if you're operating in a broken system, then you need to do something different. And that's why we do the challenges. We've got one coming up next week. Join it. We're going to take you through kind of the sped up version, the fail forward version of how you can get some really great results this time of year. Listen to last week's episode talking about coaching and why this time of year is the time to start. Don't wait till January. Let's do it now. Get this lab kind of digested. See what I did there? And get it planned for next year. Reach out to your doctor's office, figure out how you're going to get it ordered. Have just a baseline understanding with the infographic of kind of where you want to be. And this is actually going to put you in a much better starting point. And if you're looking for more fasting, kind of like, well, how do I get more consistent with it? We've got the blueprint to fasting for fat loss as well. That's in the show notes. It's a 20-page PDF. It gives you ideas of what different fasting schedules look like, because you can tackle all of these numbers with consistency in adopting a fasting lifestyle.
Yep. Yeah.
Nerd out, don't nerd out. You've already left the episode. Hopefully you already went to the show notes, because we said it a couple times, right?
Yeah.
So we're not speaking to the people that kind of slog through the nerdiness with us here today. But the reality is that, it's up to you. The system isn't going to work for you. The normal ranges are not normal. The standard ranges are not what we want to shoot for. The optimal ranges are, Tommy. So final thoughts as we wrap up today, man.
Yeah, final thoughts would be if you've been fasting for any length of time and you're trying to get something better, like there's always improvement that we could find in our blood work, even if nothing is outside of the quote unquote normal range. So take a look at some of the more optimal, more longevity ranges that are out there as well, as far as those reference ranges. Tighten up how you look at your blood work next time if everything's all aligned. But even if it's not, then I encourage you to take the next step on your fasting. So that might be the next step in consistency, or the next step in building it into your lifestyle a little bit more, so you can see more of the forest for the trees, and you can see how you can sustain this long term. And also push to the next level of your fasting. It might be a good time to hit a new high score, if you will, for your next longest fast, or to push outside of your comfort zone a little bit. If your comfort zone right now is a 16-hour fast, hey, let's tighten up the notch a little bit. Let's go to an 18 or a 20-hour fast, because if you've been, you won't see new results within your current comfort zone and your current habit patterns. So it's time to change that just a little bit, push into it a little bit further, and you're likely to see a little bit better results on the other side of that. So if you need some help with that, reach out to us. Like Scott said, grab the blueprint to fasting for fat loss, because you can really get a good understanding of how to make one or two of those tweaks today going into tomorrow. Like, don't wait, do it now.
100%. So as we wrap up 2024 and we head into 2025, we want to equip you with the tools, the knowledge, the encouragement, the coaching, whatever resources you need. We are here for you. We're going to wrap up 2024 with a bang with the last 7-day Master Your Fasting Challenge. It's coming up here in just a couple of days. So hope to see you on the inside. Looking for the registration for that, head to the show notes, click the link. Tommy, Thanksgiving's in the rearview mirror. Christmas is around the corner. Happy New Year to everyone. It's coming. Let's get on the fasting train and make this thing an absolute success. So we'll talk soon, sir. Thanks.
Let's do it. Thank you. Bye.
So you've heard today's episode, and you may be wondering, where do I start? Head on over to thefastingforlife.com and sign up for our newsletter, where you'll receive fasting tips and strategies to maximize results and fit fasting into your day-to-day life.
While you're there, download your free Fast Start guide to get started today. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure to leave us a 5-star review, and we'll be back next week with another episode of Fasting for Life.